Hi guys, we're back on Saturday. It's day 2, and we're really excited to have this next docuseries conversation. It's called Outcry. It's from Showtime. It's premiering in July. It is set right outside of Austin, which is where we are. We had no idea about this story. I'm not going to tell you much about it except to say, please don't Google it. It doesn't premiere till July. It's June. We're going to show you some clips and trailers. Emily ended up Googling it, and it kind of ruined everything for her. So if you don't know about this story, you're going to want to go on this wild ride and all the twists and turns. I just cannot believe all of the access that they got. So we're going to start out with a trailer, and then Richard Whittaker from Austin Chronicle is going to come out to moderate a conversation with director Pat Kondelis.
You have a call from an inmate at Williamson County Jail.
What's up, bro?
Did you do it?
What?
Did you do it?
In the state of Texas, there is no bigger community activity than high school football.
It's Friday Night Lights.
Greg was one of the best football players. He's smart, athletic.
The momentum he had is unlike most students ever experience.
I got a text message with Greg Kelley's photo, and it just said, "Do you know this kid?"
There was a crime committed, according to this 4-year-old boy.
I just turned numb. Like, this can't be true, this can't be true.
And that's when a second victim came forward.
We, the jury, find the defendant, Gregory Kelley, guilty of the offense.
This trial was a sham.
There's been an outcry. Everyone's saying, you got the wrong guy.
That could have been me. That could have been any of us.
They've built him up to be angelic. Then you fast forward to the search warrants and you get a different picture.
Did he ever have you take a lie detector test?
Yeah, I've passed every question but one.
We've been on this journey to try to figure out what the truth is here, and it's proven difficult at every turn.
Initially, I was pretty convinced of his innocence. Now I wouldn't be surprised either way.
Hi, this is Richard Whittaker with the Austin Chronicle, and it's my genuine pleasure to introduce director, producer, and writer of Outcry, Pat Kondelis. Pat, welcome to ATX from the couch.
Thanks, Richard. How are you doing?
I'm good. I'm good. This is a fascinating story that we kept track of in Austin because it was just so astonishing when it all happened. How did you first find out about Greg Kelley and what was happening to him up in Williamson County?
So strangely enough, I found out about it really late. When the whole case happened, the trial happened, the original trial in 2014, I was actually not in Austin. I was going back and forth between Austin and Colorado on another docuseries we're working on. So I missed all of the news coverage that happened locally on the story as it was happening in real time. So I found out about it, actually, the first conversation I had was at South by Southwest with someone in 2017. And I didn't know anything about the story, didn't know who Greg Kelley was, really didn't know any of the facts or anything that happened with it. And it started off with a conversation that piqued my interest, but it actually took me quite a while to actually want to tell the story.
What was it that made you go, this is not just something to look at, but there's a 5-hour docuseries in here? One that when you started, I think there's no way you could have told exactly where this was going to go or how big it was going to be. And that's the first question for any documentarian is like, what is it that makes you go, this is the story I want to tell?
Yeah, no, you're right. To your point, I had no idea where the story was going to go. And initially, I was not initially excited about getting into the story. It took multiple conversations with some family members and people that were close to Greg Kelley and his attorney. Even then, it just took a really long time to where I thought, okay, there's something here that's worth looking into. And a big reason that I wanted to tell the story was I couldn't stop thinking about it once I learned some of the details of it. Another big reason was I live in Williamson County. So I'm quite familiar with some of the legal controversies over the last couple of decades that Williamson County has had. So being a Williamson County resident, being a father of 2 young kids when this happened, and obviously, 2 4-year-old boys are kind of at the center of the story. The thinking about the story in that way for me was different. And as I learned more information about the story, I just found myself, I could not stop thinking about it. So we ultimately, had a conversation as a company at Bathbridge and took the leap, not knowing, having zero idea what was going to happen, not being very optimistic that anything of significance was going to happen. Our subject is in prison. I hadn't spoken to him. I'd only spoken to his family and his lawyer and, some other people around it. So it was a huge risk for us, for our time and resources to do the story. But, and then we certainly were not thinking that this was going to be a 5-hour docuseries when we started. We were thinking maybe a 2-hour one-off doc at best. And this thing just evolved over the course of 3 years for us in ways that we would have never, ever imagined.
Because one of the things about it is that Williamson County it's a very specific place. It's the joke in Austin for anybody who doesn't really know the area is that you can tell when you get to Williamson County because everybody suddenly hits the speed limit and drives very carefully, and it's still very traditional Texas, even though it's right next door to Austin, and that becomes an increasing part of the story that you tell. It's not just what happened to Greg and what happened to the kids and what happened to everybody's families, but also you start pulling apart the politics of an entire judicial system and legal system for an entire county. I was wondering about the decision to okay, we have to pull this back because that's when the story really starts to expand.
Yeah, no, I mean, it was like you said, everybody knows that lives in Austin, knows that Williamson County is a place that you just somebody says in the doc, if you're going to do it, don't do it in Williamson County. I mean, they were the same county that, initially had tried to put a kid in prison for 19 years or something like that for selling pop brownies. And, they're outwardly advertise how harsh they are with their punishment. And they do that, I think, intentionally as a deterrent to say, we're going to be very, very tough on crime here. And it's very, very different than how liberal Austin is. Williamson County is a very conservative place. And, that was a huge part of the story. When you talk about the world building of this, and the Leander Cedar Park aspect of it is also very interesting. And that kind of ended up representing a similar divide among the community when they looked at this case. It was a very, very, very polarizing case, just like the difference between Austin and Williamson County is.
And you also touch on something that I think is very important in Texas, which is high school football, which is part of what makes the story so, it's both very identifiable for anybody who's ever seen injustice up close, but at the same time, small town Texas and even mid-sized city Texas lives and dies by high school football. And that was, so I was wondering because most people are just going to associate that with Friday Night Lights. And suddenly you have to explore what this means as well. Yeah,
it was really interesting. It was, because it's not, I don't view Outcry as like a sports story, right? Like sports is kind of almost the entry point into, and then it kind of opens up from there. And it's interesting because, talking to some of the people in Leander and even people in Austin that cover local sports, it's very, very clear that football in Texas, it becomes, especially in a small town, it becomes almost like the identity of the community. And so there's a lot of pride, there's a lot of attention that's paid to high school football. And when you have somebody who is the quote unquote star of the team, like Greg Kelley was, who then gets accused of a very, very terrible crime, the sports angle and the attention that he got, I thought really ended up working as a double-edged sword in the story. And it was something that I thought was interesting to explore.
So when was the first time you actually met Greg, and what was the experience like?
The first time I met him he was in prison. And that was interesting. I think we had spoken once or twice on the phone very, very briefly before that. So I had spent time with his family, his lawyer beforehand, and I'd interviewed them. And it was it was a difficult interview to first meet him in that setting, and then to go through all the things that we needed to go through. It was challenging, very, very challenging, because at that point, we didn't know what was going to happen with the case. He didn't know what was going to happen with the case, but he had been in prison for just about 3 years at that point, and was very eager to get his side of the story out. And we ended up interviewing him twice while he was in prison.
And what was your first impression of him?
My first impression was just physically looking at him. The guy was much bigger than I was expecting. He's kind of like from an athletic standpoint, he's a physical specimen, especially when he played defensive back in high school, and he's 6'2", and at that point, I don't know, he's probably 225 or something like that. He was a really big guy walking into the room. But what impressed me right away was that I asked him some very, very difficult questions, and he did not shy away from those questions at all. So sitting there, in prison, with cameras on you, with somebody you've never really met before, interviewing you, asking you very, very intimate questions and very, very challenging questions, I was impressed with the way that he handled himself and how honest he was.
So who in the family was the first person you reached out to? Because to get to Greg, you have to go through that process of first of all having that initial interest, but then gaining the confidence of the family, of his lawyers, of everybody who's going to give you the kind of access you need to produce a documentary of this scale. How did you go about that as a director and producer?
So I was given the number of Aldo, I believe, is Greg's older brother. And I spoke to him on the phone a couple of times, and then they called together a big meeting at the Andersons' house, who is the parents of Greg's girlfriend, Gabrielle, who plays a large role in the story. And I went to their house and met David and Tracy Anderson, Greg's mother, Greg's other brother, Marlon, and then there was just a bunch of supporters it was very confusing at first. It was about a 3-hour meeting, and I didn't know who was who and what their role was in the story and what the relationship was in the story. And it was like 3.5 hours of just getting bombarded by information. And I was incredibly, skeptical of what they were telling me. And then I asked them some questions, and, they I think struggled to answer a couple of key questions for me personally. And then after that, they got me in contact with Keith Hampton, who was his defense attorney at that time. And I had a long conversation with Keith, and Keith was able to answer some very specific legal questions for me. And that was that was a big moment for me personally, after speaking to Keith and getting some of these legal answers that I couldn't get from the family. That really kind of flipped a switch for me, and okay, we're going to do this. And now I'm very, very interested with the additional information that Keith had given me. And so once getting everybody to participate, everybody was dying to get attention on the case, and they wanted to have their voice heard. So everybody around Greg was very easy to get them to say yes. Keith was very reluctant at first until we met. And then I think when he realized that we were in this for the long haul and this was not going to be coming out until the case was resolved, he said yes. And after having a couple of conversations with him, he opened up. And then the same thing with the Williamson County DA's office, which was monumentally important to get them on board as well.
How easy was that? Because, DAs, particularly if they feel that, you're going to have some kind of do-gooder, investigative TV producer who's going to come in and unravel all their work and, try and, portray them as the bad guys or, hick DAs, that you can imagine they'd have every thought going through their head about your intentions. I think from a practical point of view, that's going to be interesting if anybody looking at doing this kind of work. How do you make sure people understand you're not coming in with an intention?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think it's just time. It's getting to spend time with them and have conversations so that they understand, one, we know what we're doing. We've done our research. We're taking this very seriously. We're giving everybody the same platform and opportunity to participate and have their voice heard. That's something that we've done over backwards. We wanted everybody to know all viewpoints are going to be considered here. But getting the Williamson County DA's office on board was shockingly easy. It was probably the easiest step of this entire process from an access standpoint. And I think that was because they were a different regime than had prosecuted Greg Kelley in 2014. And so Sean Dick is the Williamson County DA, and he kind of ran on a campaign of transparency. So when I met with him from the very beginning, they were a complete open book with us.
And that's an important part of this, is that this is a subject material. I think a lot of people, there are so many miscarriage of justice stories out there, but when you bring in, what Greg was accused of, I think a lot of people are automatically going to flinch and to pull away, because it is. You can look at the sentencing guidelines. It's one of the few things where the legal system looks at you and basically goes, "We're throwing the key away." Right. And there's lots of reasons for people to get very, very nervous about even trying to cover that. Was that ever an issue for you?
Yeah, I mean, it was difficult to talk about, and it was difficult. I mean, Greg was convicted of a super aggravated sexual assault of a child, which in Texas is a super aggravated sexual assault means if it's a child under the age of 6, it's a much higher sentencing guideline, which is a minimum of 25 years in prison with no possibility of parole. So it's an unbelievably harsh sentence. And the crime is very, very emotional for everybody to discuss and talk about. So yeah, there was a lot of times where it was very, very difficult, but it was also part, I think, of the trust that we had to build with all the people that we were interviewing and that were involved in this case, is that we were going to get into all of it. We were going to get into the specifics. That's the whole point of this, is to try to figure out what the truth is, what happened here. And the only way that I saw that you could do that is by breaking down every single piece of evidence and looking at every piece of the puzzle before it's all put together for the audience. So that's what we try to do.
I don't think any documentarian who's really convinced that this is a story that it's worthwhile is ever comfortable with it. I think that's part of what drives you to keep going.
Yeah, exactly. And with this, because the case and the crime is so emotional, we were extra sensitive to that. And the positive thing about this taking 3 years for us, on the one hand, it was incredibly frustrating because we just couldn't answer questions to people on when's there going to be a resolution, when this is going to be resolved. We had no idea. But the positive on that was that length of time for us allowed us to get evidence that we probably would not have gotten if it would have been a shorter time frame, and really dig in and find out some things and some major revelations that I don't think we would have gotten either. So it was very unique from my my career doing this to be along in the moment and telling the story in present tense, not waiting until there'd been a resolution and then trying to go back in time and tell the story. Because the audience basically is experiencing this story in chronological order the same way that we were when we were making it. And that was something that was very unique and something that I was actually, really, really felt good about while we were doing it, because everything evolved in the story. It was very, very fluid. So it becomes it was a roller coaster ride for us doing this. And I think it will be for the audience when they watch it.
That raises one question of, if you're involved with this for 3 years and it's an ongoing process and you're on the ground during, a lot of new detective work, a lot of new investigation, the risk is that you become part of the story, which is always something that I know documentarians are very afraid of. And as a journalist myself, there's always those points where you're like, what point have I crossed a line and I'm now very deeply involved with this myself? How did you handle that, particularly because, like I said, this is something where new evidence can come up, and if you're probing, to do the kind of documentary that you need to do, was there a point where you're like, oh, hang on, am I in this story now, or am I just an observer?
Yeah, we did everything we could to stay out of the story and to make sure that we didn't become part of the story, because the story was way too important for that, and we didn't want to taint anything. But yeah, it was very, very difficult to navigate that, because it was, finding out some information, and at certain points having to keep that very close to your chest and not, sharing that with certain people. And then the other thing was, challenging people on every side of it was the other way that we do that. And making sure that everybody understood that no matter what we find, we're going to run with it, the good or bad, and trying desperately not to do something that would kind of put us into the story and into the mix like that. But I'm sure that's not a great answer, but that was something that we were very, very aware of, and something that we desperately try to avoid in this.
I think that's the only thing you can do as documentarian when you're doing this kind of work, is to try not to become the story. There is always going to be a point where somebody's going to come to you because they feel that they can, by talking to a member of the media, they can put their thumb on a scale. And I think the only thing is to be aware that nobody calls you just out of the goodness of their own heart.
Exactly. Everybody's working at an angle, always. Yeah, there was some stuff that happened, but I mean, we got, there was a couple of moments where a fork in the road as far as us becoming part of the story. There were some legal battles that were going on behind the scenes for us to get access to some of this information, and freedom of information requests that I very strongly believe were unjustly denied. So there was lots of conversations about how far do we push this to that very point, and then we're going to become part of the story, right? Are we going to file a civil lawsuit here and drag this into court, and then where's that going to put us in the story? So, I mean, we had very specific conversations about that, and had some very difficult choices were made.
Well, Pat, it's a remarkable series that just keeps you on the edge of your seat until right the way through. So I think let everybody in the audience know exactly when it's going to be debuting.
Yeah, it's going to air on Showtime on Sunday, July 5th. And I think what they're doing is the episode 1 is going to air on Showtime that night. And then I think at the same time, they're going to release all 5 parts on Showtime Anytime app and the Showtime.com, I think that's
fantastic.
Right. Yeah.
Well, like I said, it's a remarkable series, and everybody watching should definitely catch it when it does drop. Thanks everybody for tuning in on this. Remember, follow along all weekend. Follow us on Twitter at ATX Festival. Use the hashtag TV Together. And don't forget, we are raising money for Direct Relief and the Actors Fund. You can find the button to donate on our YouTube page. And thanks, Pat. Good luck with the series. And don't miss it.